Welcome everybody, and today I wanted to share with you a couple of images that I absolutely love from this autumn. Probably my favourite pictures from the autumn season and possibly my favourite pictures from the entire year. One of the locations I use for bird photography is quite a large duck pond, which is fairly close to home, and it's really photogenic. Just got your common species, your mallards, tufted ducks, swans, a few other things in there as well. Now I decided to go in the morning because I hadn't been in the morning and I wanted to assess the light. It's one thing to look on a map to have an idea, but I think until you're actually there, you can never really know exactly how the light's going to play out and how it's going to work. So when I arrived here, I could see that the light wasn't really fantastic. At this time of year, there was still quite a lot of leaves, actually lots of leaves on the trees. It was a bright sunny day and that was blocking out quite a lot of light. So in some areas you did have bright sun, but in other areas it was very, very shaded. And the ducks were largely swimming in the shade. It was just too dark in those areas. Sometimes you need that little bit of extra light just to give it a bit of pop to make the images work. And in terms of exposure, it was really tricky exposure situation. I think I tried just about every type of exposure mode technique that I could. I tried aperture priority, I tried manual ISO and automatic ISO to see what was the best in this situation. I could see occasionally there's just a few little pools of light, just a few gaps in the trees, and that little bit of sunlight was just filtering through. And occasionally some of the ducks would swim through that, but it was quite rare. So this really is just a case of just sheer persistence, of just waiting until a duck comes into the right position. So I could see one mallard, a drake mallard, that was swimming towards me, and I knew that that pool of light was kind of between me and the duck, and if it kept swimming it was going to go through that. And sure enough, that mallard, it swam into that patch of light, swam through there for maybe 1 or 2 seconds as I took a series of shots, and that is what just made all the difference. I absolutely love this image. The lighting is absolutely beautiful for me. The colours, the reflections, everything looks really good. The bonus on top of that was two things. One, the bird almost completely straight on, looking at me, nice and symmetrical, and also that little bit of water, the water that's just dripping off the edge of the beak. To have those two extra little elements just, for me, really lifts the image even more. So I think that's a really good example of being in a situation where you're not completely happy with the conditions, they're not exactly as you want them to be, and you know your success rate might be quite low, but just literally just sticking it out and just doing your very best. And if you do that, you never know what might happen. You might get that piece of luck, as I did. The second situation was with a family of swans. Now they'd been kind of circling around the pond quite regularly for the last couple of hours, and I could see the family of swans right down at the bottom at the far edge of the pond. And all of a sudden I heard that distinctive sound of a swan taking off from the water. Some of you'll know it's quite a distinctive sound when that happens. So I looked up and I could see I think 3 swans taking off. So I instinctively just swung the camera up to try and get the focus point on one of the birds. Now I tried to take a few shots of the swans in flight and failed miserably, made a complete hash of the exposure, really difficult exposure situation, made a complete mess of that, pretty much blowing out all the whites. So I thought that was it, that opportunity was over. Now one of the adult swans did land almost straight away, but one of the younger swans actually carried on. So one of the immature swans carried on flying and then came to land much closer to me on the opposite side of the pond. And I again just did the best I could, just tracking that bird in. I didn't have time to think about exposure or composition. I'm literally just thinking about tracking that bird and trying to keep it in focus. I got the swan as it was landing in the water. The exposure is unbelievably good. How the exposure is so accurate, I don't know. Again, manual exposure with automatic ISO, and I think it's just the balance, the fact that it's a mixture of white and black is what's helped to balance the exposure. That's what I think. The pose and the water droplets, the dark background, just to really set it off, to really make it stand out. Now I've got 2 images, and one of them I prefer the light. I think there's a bit more light on that. It's kind of caught the weak sunlight slightly more, and I prefer that. But the annoying thing is that beak is just touching the edge of the wing, and that is really frustrating. There's nothing you can do about that, but it's really frustrating. It just lets it down slightly. Now the second image, the head is nice and clear, so the composition is arguably better, but I don't think the light is quite as good. But both images, just for that white on black, the water droplets that are coming up there as it's landed, absolutely fantastic. And I really had no idea how the pictures were going to look. I had no idea at all what I had captured. I had a feeling maybe it was fairly good. But when I looked on the back of the camera, I was just pretty much blown away really by how the image looked. And again, just an example of just trying. In these situations, sometimes it's literally a case of just shooting and shooting, and you never know what you're going to get. So after starting out with what I thought was going to be a really poor photography session, I actually ended up with two of my favourite images from the entire year. I hope you've enjoyed me taking you through these couple of images. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.